Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. Our season preview series of podcasts rolls on. Today, we're going to talk about the Auburn Tigers, those kind of perpetually underrated and overachieving Auburn Tigers. Mark and I will do plenty of self-flagellation about underestimating them in the past and talk about how we think this year's a little bit different. We'll get into all of that here in a second. But first, I have to let you know that this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover is brought to you by PitchLogic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. The easy-to-use and affordable technology makes the platform accessible to every player at every level. All the metrics and features used at the highest level. See pitchlogic.com for more information. All right, Mark, I alluded to it, but
yeah,
Auburn is kind of that program that, every year we go in, and this was true last year too. I remember talking about it like, I'm not quite sure what to expect. I don't quite see it in some respects. And look, it took them a while last year to figure it out. So, but they ultimately end up 34, 23-1 overall, 17-13 in SEC play. They end up hosting a regional. Now they did go 0-2 in that regional, losses to Penn and Southern Miss. So not ideal there, but a heck of a run over the second half to get in position to host a regional. I was there in what I feel like was their turnaround weekend. They went to South Carolina when South Carolina was top 5 in the country, certainly top 10, might have been top 5, and won that series. And that really kind of felt like a tide shift, if you will, no pun intended, their rivals, kind of a shift in the tide there in Auburn's season to get where they got. But anyway, I mean, that's just, look, Mark, I mean, I know you feel the same way. This is just a team that whatever we think they're going to do, we just need, at this point, it feels like we just need to add like a little bit of a tax on the end of it, in a good way for how good we think they're going to be.
One of the best lines I've heard about Auburn, you can see it in our Auburn snapshot. We talked to some various coaches in the league to give, anonymous feedback on the program. And I love this line from one of the coaches. It was like, that game where you go around and you look at each position and you compare the two teams and you figure out, well, who has the advantage at every one? Well, you do that with Auburn and an opponent, and it's like 7-2, right, for the opponent. And then Auburn goes out and wins the series. And they do that time and time again. And at some point, you either have to change how you evaluate, okay, or you just have to give them credit that the sum of those parts are going to be greater than the individual pieces. And to me, that's coaching, right? And I think that's what we have to look at when you're talking about Butch Thompson's Auburn program. They've just been, every year you look at them, and yet they have good players. I mean, let's not forget that part. But everyone in the SEC has good players, and they continue to find ways to elevate and be consistent and just be the kind of program that maximizes their ability. And for me, I mean, they had the best record in the SEC in the second half of the season last year, and that's why they hosted a regional, okay? Because they were trending upward, and they just didn't have enough pitching, and they really pieced it together. And when you look at this year, they have all of those pieces back, and a lot of those kids were young and really weren't ready for the roles they were in, but they took their lumps and they learned from it, and you would expect them to take jumps this year, okay, because of all that experience they gained. Plus, they added pieces. I mean, they lost Tommy Vale, they lost Chase Isbell. Nobody else really of consequence. Everyone else is back. Plus, they brought in some really key pieces, really power arm kind of guys that they didn't have a ton of last year. So I think you look at Auburn pitching wise, I really like their their pieces, their depth that they're going to be able to have and mix and match. And Butch is great at finding matchups and things like that. So from a pitching standpoint, really excited about their potential considering what they got by with last year. And they're so much better on the mound this year. And I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, if you're telling me that they hosted a regional with the pitching staff they had last year, which, you know,
Right.
as I mentioned on our previous episode, was, you know, led by a 6th-year senior on his 3rd team. If they were able to do that with that group, no disrespect, but a lot of young
Mhm.
guys, a lot of guys who frankly didn't have traditional SEC level stuff, and
Yeah.
they were able to do that. What will they do with a staff with another year of experience under their belts? And adding to it, right? I mean, Cam Tilley is a
Mhm.
freshman that people think is ready to go right away. Dylan Watts, a JUCO
Right.
transfer, people are really excited about. So you have to filter those guys in. And we were talking offline. I don't think I'm sure I knew this at the time, but I hadn't totally internalized the fact that, look, you've got Butch Thompson, who knows pitching extremely well. That's his thing. They've got a new pitching coach in Everett Tieford, who has a more of a minor league background, which I think is good. You know, you look at last year, and Butch was working with Darren Schoenrock, and Coach Rock is as good a pitching coach as he is. Those guys kind of operate pretty similarly. They're both kind of, you know, old school baseball guys. Well, Tieford comes with a different perspective, coming from the minor leagues and working on the pro side. And then, you know, Scott Foxhall, who got let go at Mississippi State last year because, well, the pitching was what it was at State. That's just kind of how the business goes. But he's in there as a director of player development. So they've got a lot of interesting pitching minds there. And look, no matter what you know, Mississippi State's pitching really struggled last 2 years. There's no way around it. But like, Scott Foxhall is very respected in the game. Things got sideways. It happens, you know, so you have to assume he's a value add there as well. So I'm excited to see how it ends up rolling out. Obviously, there's a big question at the front with Joseph Gonzalez, but
Mhm.
man, you talk about what a difference a year makes, where, you know, last year it felt like it was such a blow when he went down. And yes, they figured it out, but boy, think about if they had the Joseph Gonzalez from the prior year,
Yeah.
how much easier life would have been, right? Theoretically, anyway. So there's still that question about him lingering out there. And yet it just feels like the stakes are a little lower this time
Mhm.
around, right?
Oh,
And so,
it's well said. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
And
he's a
so,
bonus at this point. I mean, if he comes back to where he was, oh my goodness. I mean, Auburn is way underrated. But if he's just okay, I mean, okay for him, then they're still really good, right? There's still potential. Maybe he can go out and match up for 4 or 5 innings with somebody's ace, and then you turn it over and you've got pieces to mix and match, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I think that's what's exciting about the Auburn pitching staff is how they've just got so many options. And there are a few teams in the league, at least on paper, that look that way. But because we've seen Auburn do it with fewer pieces, when you give them the whole quiver, I think, you know, they're going to have arrows coming from every direction here. So it's an exciting team to just see how they want to use all those pieces.
there are other questions on the mound. I think, you know, how much of a jump does Chase Allsup make? You know, they were
Mhm.
kind of looking at him last year, and it just, you know, he had his moments,
He would
but
tease you, man. I mean, he
yeah,
looked great for 2 innings, and then sometimes, you know, it would just kind of deteriorate from there, right?
yeah, it's a great arm. There's
Mhm.
no debating that.
Yeah,
But I mean,
and I think, you know, having him, I mean, he's that high ceiling guy, right? And if you get what, you know, if you can elevate him to match up with some of these, I mean, he can match up with anybody with his stuff, right? And that's the part that they don't always have. They, you know, a lot of times there's a pitchability guy, and or they're just kind of getting by with multiple people. And but if you have that true ace, which maybe it's Gonzalez, maybe it's also maybe it's somebody else, right? That takes that step forward, then I think that's the piece that can take Auburn back to Omaha.
yeah, it should be said about Allsup. I mean, did he become the rotation stalwart guy that they maybe hoped he would be going into last year? No, but you know, he pitched pretty well down the stretch in SEC play. Second
Yeah.
highest or second best ERA on
Hmm.
the team in SEC play last year, which the highest ERA or highest ERA, best ERA on the team in SEC play is Christian Herberholz, who is probably
Yeah.
going to be a part of this rotation. And that's a guy who I felt like at the end of the year was really throwing the ball well, and was kind of underrated for how well he was pitching. ERA in SEC play 2.30 for Herberholz.
Hmm.
And it's a relatively small sample size, but it's 31 and a third innings. So it's not nothing. So that's kind of intriguing there. You look at the lineup, and to me, the big question here, I mean, there's some certainty. We know Ike Irish is, going to be great. I think we feel good about Chris Stanfield taking a step forward. I think Cooper McMurray, the power is going to be there. To me, the big question is they're going a little more in on transfers than they have in the past. Transfers have been a thing for them. We remember Sonny D 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Last year offensively, Cooper McMurray was the guy they brought in. I was blanking on it. And it was McMurray, a guy I just mentioned, but now they're looking at maybe 4 transfers in the starting lineup with Derek Fabian from Florida, Javon Hernandez, Jacksonville State, Cooper Weiss from Miami, Ohio, Mason Mainers also from Jacksonville State. How do those guys take to the SEC? Now, I think one thing we have learned, and you look at Sonny D, and I think this is a great example, the guys who can really hit, and I don't mean just put up big numbers, but guys who have hit ability, guys who have quick hands and a good smooth bat path, quick swings, can hit a breaking ball, all that kind of stuff, that tends to translate. And by all accounts, Javon Hernandez is a guy who can really hit. So, you look at him and think maybe, okay, that's something that maybe translates. Derek Fabian, we know, is super talented, right? He would not have started his career at Florida. He wasn't just at Florida because he was Judd Fabian's brother. The guy could play. So there's talent there. He hit extremely well on the Cape. We'll see how that translates. But big picture here, it's just how well does that group acclimate to the SEC? Because to my point, this is leaning on transfers more than Auburn has in the past. And so how does that pan out for them given how much they're going to need those guys?
Yeah, those are excellent points. One thing I'm really interested in is with the Irish. One, he's moving to catcher. Okay, so how does that look? Also, he's a year older. He was a doubles machine last year. Are a lot of those doubles homers this year? He's just, he physically mature. He's a freshman last year. Great at bats. Take the ball. He hits it where it's pitched. Opposite field power. All that kind of stuff. Is he going to? I think he hit what? He hit 6 home runs last year. I think he's a double-digit guy for sure. It's just, how high does that go? And it'll probably drop your doubles a little bit, but I think he'll take that. The other part of this is Bobby Pierce is back. Veteran guy, been through the wars. You know what you're getting. Can he take another step? And the middle of the lineup with he and Irish and McMurray with Stanfield at the top. I mean, that's going to stack up with most teams in the league. So there's some potential, especially if you get some of these transfers you mentioned, to kind of join that crowd. I think for me, that's really the key for them is can Irish take the next step, or maybe it's Pierce or somebody to be that, that scary guy in the middle of the lineup, or can they all elevate enough where you don't need the one guy because they're all kind of picking up the slack and you can't pitch to anybody, right? And that to me is the key because I think their pitching will be better. It wasn't bad last year, but I think with all the pieces that we talked about, they're going to be better on the mound, and they have a chance offensively to be as good, if not better, this year. And if that happens, they're going to be, we didn't have them ranked. I think they were 26th, 27th. If you want to carry it out, they'll be better than that by the end of the year if those things happen. If not, well, SEC's tough, and you can definitely take it on the chin a couple times and not hit your goals.
Yeah, the difference, in being 17-13 in the league and ranked in the top 25 and being 13-17 and going into Hoover needing some wins is not that big a difference. Yeah. So yeah, it's a little bit of a hairpin thing. I'm glad you mentioned Bobby Pierce, steady veteran, kind of a weird career. Was more of a power guy 2 years ago. Last year hit for a really high average, but didn't have as much power. So what do we get out of him? I think we know he's going to be a productive guy, but what kind of season is it? And then I mentioned Chris Stanfield briefly, but he's a guy who, when I watched him play, I would have, we got to the end of the season and I remember going to the Auburn regional. I bounced in between Tuscaloosa and Auburn. And when I was at the Auburn regional, I remember looking at the stat sheet and kind of being like, I I would have assumed Chris Stanfield had better numbers than he did. And they're not bad, don't get me wrong. But just what he brings to the table in terms of athleticism and being a catalyst at the top of the order. He's got some sneaky pop, but last year he stole home a couple times, and he brings a different.
He's out there, right?
Yeah,
when he's on the bases,
100%. He brings a different element for that offense at Auburn, which it's not really a team that runs a lot. It kind of tends to be a team that's more physical in the lineup than anything else. So when he's out there, though, it is just a little bit different. So is he a superstar, this year?
Yeah.
So we'll have to, will his stats look like I thought they looked like at the end of last season? I'll kind of be excited to find out, because that guy's a lot of fun to watch. So
yeah. One note on Stanfield. I reached out to our guy, Lindsey Crosby, who's, big baseball guy there in Auburn, and he couldn't say enough good things about Stanfield. So I think that's one of the guys who's kind of taken maybe more of a leadership kind of role. He's certainly a magnetic personality kind of kid. So you have that guy at the top of the lineup who's kind of making it go, and then you have Irish, and you have Pierce, and you have McMurray, and who knows who else, Mainers. All those guys hitting in the middle of the lineup. That's a good run producing group, and I think because of that, they're able to project and hang with some of these top lineups in the SEC. Everybody's raving on what A&M's going to have, and what Florida's going to have, and what LSU or Tennessee, or all these great offenses. And Auburn's, they have potential to at least be in that discussion if things fall the right way.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Look for the Lindsey Crosby bump for Chris Stanfield, and we will hold it against him personally if Chris Stanfield does not
no pressure
make that leap. That is going to do it for this episode of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. If you are an Auburn fan and you're listening to just this episode in our team preview series, thank you. First off, we appreciate you listening as always, but please check out and get to know your enemies a little bit. Check out some of our other team preview editions of the podcast. We're doing 14 of these, one for each team. We've already done Alabama and Arkansas. Obviously, we're doing Auburn now, so we'll move forward with Florida, Georgia, and on throughout the rest of the SEC in the coming days and weeks. So check all of those out. So thank you, Auburn fans and everyone else, for listening. Thank you, Pitch Logic, and thank you, Mark, as always, for joining me. We'll talk to you.